Right now, let's go back and continue with our leading story. There have been reports of violence in the minibus taxi strike in Cape Town. City authorities say they've activated a response plan to protect commuters using public transport. For more on this, we're joined by the city's mayoral committee member for safety and security, JP Smith. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for your time here on All Angles. What are these interventions that you have now put in place to ensure safety?
Good day. From early this morning, after it became apparent last night that the associations intended to include in their protest march today also interference and disruption of the work of other public transport operators, we then from about 4 o'clock this morning deployed all our available resources to the key hotspots where that violence was suspected. We also anticipated the roadblocks and try to prevent our roads from being blockaded. We were able to fend off one or two of the attacks, stone-throwing attacks, and there was also an attempt to ignite a Golden Arrow bus that was deflected and where we pursued the assailants, but they managed to get away. But unfortunately, it's hundreds of kilometers of road where these attacks are possible, and so a Golden Arrow bus and a truck at this stage, and unconfirmed also a bakkie, have been set alight. And we really want to condemn in the strongest possible language these kind of cowardly attacks instigated by some elements, criminal elements within the taxi association. It really makes discussion impossible in good faith, and therefore I see that the permit to march was withdrawn. SAPS have, however, decided that notwithstanding the Gatherings Act permit being withdrawn, that they will permit the march to go ahead. We are monitoring the march very carefully. And if there's any public violence that goes with it, we will try through civil legal action to hold the organizers accountable for the cost, as we did with Casato and the EFF before.
Any arrests so far? You said that there's been disruption instead of just a peaceful protest. So we know that there's been violence allegedly in Nyanga. There has been 2 buses that were set alight. Have there been any arrests?
I'm not aware of any specific arrests. There will most likely have been arrests with a road blockage this morning because the taxi drivers blockaded the road and then were milling around their vehicles. So SAPS were required to assist with that. We did have a bit of a delay in having the public order police on site this morning after the arrangements we made last night. But I'm pretty confident some arrests will have resulted this morning from that action in.
All right, we have lost the MMC for safety and security in the city of Cape Town, JP Smith. A connection issue there, but we will try and go back to him. I'm hearing that you're back with us, Mr. Smith. If you can hear me right now, some of their complaints include being impounded, apparently unlawfully. Do you know anything about this?
No, ma'am, it is certainly not unlawfully. The problem is that their conduct is unlawful. So there is a legislation that governs public transport vehicles. It's called the National Land Transportation Act. In terms of this legislation, persons are not allowed to operate in terms of national law without an operating license. And what happens is the taxi associations are constantly taking in more membership, charging huge membership fees, and then trying to get these members to operate on routes, but without operating licenses. So they then put pressure on the regulator to try and issue licenses. And when their vehicles operate without the operating permits, we are duty and legally bound to impound, because overtraded routes and pirate taxis lead to violence. One of the key ways to suppress the taxi violence is to ensure that rogue taxis are not operating. So we do that very diligently as best we can. And I will tell you that I think that the key problem here is the associations and the role they play in the permitting, that it is important and has been said for many years that the ongoing recognition of the associations in the permitting conditions of these licenses is a key part of the problem, that must be removed from the legislation, and that the permitting or licensing relationship needs to be directly with government and the taxi owners rather than through the intermediaries of these associations, because with that comes a whole package of other problems and agendas. And so this is part of what we are engaging the provincial government in the Western Cape on to understand, and I have clear indications from MEC Dalen Mitchell that he and the provincial government understand this only too well.
Which areas, Mrs. Smith, have been affected in the city of Cape Town where you'd warn people not to go to?
Most of the blockages have now been resolved along the N2. The taxis have made their way into the CBD and are proceeding with their march to the provincial legislature. So I think most of that risk is mitigated, although because the attacks are quite cowardly, they are targeting vehicles that cannot protect themselves. So it is difficult to say when you will be safe and when not. But the problem spots this morning were Kraaifontein and Blikkombos, around Nyanga and along the N2, specifically Khayelitsha, where some of these attacks have happened. I think at the moment public transport in general is for today would be risky. And I must say I admire those public transport operators who tried their best to continue rendering a service to the commuter. The public in South Africa have the freedom of association and the freedom of movement. And when a particular operator decides to withhold services, their services, that is their discretion and their prerogative. But that cannot come with fear and intimidation and threats of violence and actual violence against others who want to continue to render service. That is illegal, and we do expect SAPS to investigate and prosecute the individuals that are responsible for this, not just today, but on previous occasions as well, because this is a repeated pattern of behavior by this industry.
All right, thank you very much for your time here on All Angles. JP Smith, he's the MMC of Safety and Security in Cape Town.